Welcome, low ego action heroes. This is Debbie Levitt from deltacx.com. We're a full service CX and UX consultancy. Check us out. And today is episode 121, Getting UX Research Buy-in. And of course, our special guest joining us momentarily will be the always special guest, Michele Ronsen from curiositytank.com. Remember, we are certainly live today. It's July 29th, 2021. If you have any questions at all, you can ask them in the LinkedIn live chat as well as the YouTube chat. I'll be watching both for questions and comments. So throw them out there as soon as you can. So let's introduce Michele to the people who may not know her. Michele, thanks for joining. I'm going to spell your name for everybody, and then I'll ask you to introduce yourself. Michele is Michele. Ronsen is Ronsen, and you can find her at curiositytank.com. Michele, tell us who the heck you are.
Thanks, Debbie. It's so great to be back. Who am I? That's a really good question. I'm, for the purposes of this podcast, I am a career user research practitioner and educator. I teach people around the world how to ask better questions, and I help organizations of all sizes make more informed decisions. Most of the people on this podcast or in your audience on the YouTube channel will probably be most familiar with my Ask Like a Pro series, which is a series of user research workshops that encourages people to get hands-on to conduct their own research, and I provide them with feedback and guidance at every step of the way, and they leave having had conducted their own research as getting a case study to showcase what they have learned as well.
Cool. Hashtag not sponsored. I do not get paid to tell you that Michele has a good course and you should check it out. So today we're talking about getting buy-in from stakeholders and other leaders when you're trying to do research. But before we even get that far, let's roll back in time and let's think about when we are applying to that job. Can you talk about some of the red flags? I'll fly the red flag here. Can you talk about some of the red flags people might see maybe in the job description or during the interview that tell us this might not be a company that supports research?
Yeah. So this is a great question. And I actually wrote a whole blog post about this on my website, and I will give you that link as well. I didn't understand that. So in the interview process, I suggest you start to ask questions immediately about the UX maturity of the organization. To me, this is a much stronger indicator than whether or not this is going to be, whether or not it's an established team or a big team or has a great reputation or it's a product that you love to use or not. And UX maturity can be ascertained by a number of simple questions. For example, tell me about your design process. Who's included? Who's involved? What sort of steps or stages in the process are included today? What's working well and what's not? And research should be considered a part of the design process. So if it's not coming up in those really early conversations, that in and of itself might be something for you to more deeply into. Chances are, if it's an existing team and there is research in place, some sort of research, there should be some sort of processes and protocols. I would start to ask about those too. How often are you conducting research? What kind of research are you conducting? Who are the advocates of this research? What were the outcomes? Tell me about a similar project or a recent project. Were the learnings acted upon? Where is the research? Can I, do you have an archive of what exists? And
yeah, they probably won't show it to you if you're just interviewing, but you want to make sure they have some sort of archive or repository.
Exactly. And these questions will really give you a sense of their UX maturity. Perhaps the biggest benefit of joining a team that already has some sort of research function in place is that they have already won the case or won the battle that research is important, and there are some processes and tools in place. But we can really there's a whole bunch of gray there, right? So you really want to understand what you're getting into.
I've also been recommending to people that when they interview, another good question could be, do designers and or engineers wait for the results or outcomes or reports from the research? Because I hear from a lot of people who are on research teams and they're researching, but the designers and the engineers are already ideating or making concepts or wireframes or even building the product. And the researcher's like, uh, uh, what? So I think your process questions should speak to that, but I also think another possible question could be, do people wait for the research outcomes? Aitan says she has a question. Well, don't forget to type it, Aitan, and then we'll ask Michelle. Future question will be coming. Another question might be, as you were just saying, is this an established research team? Am I the first researcher who's coming in? Tell us more about some of the pros and cons of coming into a company when you are the first researcher or coming into the established team.
Yeah. So again, I have a whole article on this, but in sum, I think some of the benefits of joining an established team are that these arguments have been won, or at least have occurred to some degree or some extent. There are probably some tools and process in place, and there has already been discussion about why research is important, who's involved, and things like that. There's also a chance to learn from professionals, and this mentoring and guidance is really, really important. There are also pros to, being a solo researcher or being a team of one. However, you should walk into this with eyes wide open. If you're being asked to conduct research and to build a research team at the same time, that is a huge red flag. Those are two very distinct jobs and distinct needs. There's builders and there's maintainers, right? So unless you have an extraordinary capacity and background and have done both in the past, that in and of itself is a red flag.
Can I add something to that? I would add
Yes.
similarly, I sometimes hear about people, especially who are newer to UX research, juniors and mid-levels, who are sometimes the first hire at a company, and the company was like, oh, and by the way, you're also the research ops person. You also have to strategize our company's approach to research. And my thought is, wait a minute, a strategic job, and you're supposed to be the worker bee doing all the work. When are you going to get all of this done? Is this an unreasonable ask? And will you even have the real authority to change the company's approach to research?
Yeah, it's huge. I couldn't agree with you more.
I'll give you a red flag.
These, wave the flag. They're two very distinct jobs. There's only so much time in the day. The context switching back and forth will take a toll. I would find out what's more important, and then spend your first 60 or 90 days focused on just that one thing until you can actually assess what you need. Now, a lot of researchers come to me and say, I've been hired to build a team. What do I do? How do I build? Who do I hire? And things like that. And my first questions back to them are, what are the questions that you're looking to provide answer, or the team make more decisions about? And that in and of itself should dictate a lot of this, as well as what the UX maturity and culture is around design and research within the organization.
Now, if I can jump in again, the first thing that came to my mind when you said that hypothetical question of someone being like, hey, I got hired and I'm supposed to build a team. What do I do? My thought was, oh my God, how did we hire someone to build a team and they don't know how to build a team? So my my question to you about that is, do you offer paid coaching where someone who feels like, oh my God, I'm in this tough position, I'm stuck. I'm supposed to build a research team. Holy cats, I don't know what to do. Obviously there are resources like you and maybe Joel Barr out there, but can somebody contact you and maybe get some paid coaching sessions and you can help them plan this stuff?
Yes, absolutely. And very much for putting that out there. That was not discussed. Yeah, I do this a lot. And be prepared for some hard questions. I've built a couple of teams from the ground up. I've built numerous design teams from the ground up. I've built a couple of research teams. Also, I have a lot of experience in people, logistics, management, talent planning, and things like that. But the first questions are going to be the same. What's the UX maturity of the organization? What types of questions are they looking to answer immediately and long term? How well oiled is the design function today? Where are you now, and where do you want to go? And things like that. So there's not just a stock answer. There's also a great book called Leah's book called, I think it's the User Research Team of One,
Oh,
which
user
is
research
really
team of
informative.
one?
I think that's the name of it. Yes.
Okay,
It's a
so
Rosenfeld book.
recommended book. Yeah, recommended book for everybody. We have a question from Aitan in the YouTube chat. Thank you, Aitan, friend of the show. And here's what she says. It's a little bit longer than is going to come up on my screen, so I'll read the whole thing. What if the company only wants to hire one researcher, but they have a bunch of research projects, and they say designers will also help you with the research project? How do you draw boundaries?
That's a great question. Before I answer that, I want to just jump back a little bit to building a team. It's not just about hiring the right researchers and finding out the right questions for that organization. Also, to be taken into consideration is your tool stack, right? Your tool stack should be selected according to UX and the types of questions to ask. So I just wanted to round out that response. In terms of what if the company wants to hire one researcher, but they have a bunch of research projects and they say that the designers will also help. So my first advice there is to understand what your priorities are. And if no one's dictating the priorities to you, to come up with some sort of framework that will help you kind of like put questions through a decision tree. So for example, you're always going to want to work on the types of research questions that are closely tied to business goals, right? So we want to make sure that there is a direct connection to the KPIs or the OKRs or whatever we're talking about. Now, assuming that all the questions coming your way meet that initial criteria, what we're going to want to do is work it through some sort of decision tree. And that decision tree might be things like, when do we need to become more informed about this topic? Is it 1 month or is it 6 months? Another consideration might be, how confident do we need to feel? And that will also dictate how rigorous an approach you might use or not. And then lastly is, some sort of tiebreaker or rule breaker where you're going to be able to lean on someone else in the organization to help you decide which trade-offs to make, because you can't boil the ocean. It's just not possible.
And I wonder, I have a strong opinion on this. You might disagree. Disagreements are welcome here. I do feel like sometimes when companies want to put people we might, let's just say no, are unqualified onto research, whether it's the BA or a product manager or an engineer is going to interview users, or maybe it's even some of the UX designers who haven't really studied or practiced research yet. I feel like it's something I want to put in a risk register. I want to say that we might not have the right business intelligence going in, or we might not have conducted our testing correctly. Because we did not have a specialized researcher on it, this should be noted as a risk in the risk register. Do you feel like that's fair, or do you feel like that's being too harsh on our teammates, or something else?
I think that there's always a risk. You could even have a trained researcher or someone that thinks they're trained to do quality research that is introducing bias. unintentionally or
Sure.
unknowingly, I should say. So I think that there's a risk across the board. The best way I have found to um, democratize research, which is definitely a very controversial term, to bring in people slowly. So first, bring them in as stakeholders and work with them continuously throughout the process. This is what we do in the Ask Like a Pro program. The All Lands work with their core stakeholders continuously throughout the process. It's an excellent way to get a close-up view of actually what's involved and what it entails. A next level would be to bring them in to take notes during your sessions and to use a strategic note-taking framework. That's a great way to pull them in. Another great way is to include them in an analysis and synthesis workshop. Another great way would be to gather feedback on the top line report and or the presentation. So I think that there's a number of different ways that you can slowly introduce people to the process and what's involved. This will not only build your credibility, but it will indoctrinate them and give them a much better appreciation for the rigor that truly is involved. But it all ties back to that initial researcher or that person in the organization. If they have a flawed skill set or if they have some big gaps, they're going to likely pass those on.
Yeah, and thanks for explaining that because people who hang out on my channel know I tend to be against the whole democratization idea. But the way you've explained it here it seems to be different than some of the other definitions I've heard. I think it's interesting that you're talking about people as what I would call more collaborators, because there's nowhere where you didn't say have your product manager interview the customer. You didn't say have your engineer plan a usability test. I liked how you used them as assistants and collaborators rather than get in here and plan the research and choose the methodology and do the research, because some definitions I see of democratized research actually call specifically for that. So I'm so glad you went the extra mile and explained your definition of democratization, because it sounds like my definition of collaboration.
And I think that there's many different ways to do it, but to just throw someone in the ocean or in the pond and say just do this without providing them with some feedback, some guardrails, some training, that to me is not only introducing risk, it's reckless, um, and yeah, beyond risky. It's unconstitutional.
I love that. That's great. We need a risk register and a holy shit register. And
Holy shit! I like don't do that.
we need like the fire button, like no, everybody no. And I'm reminded of something you said to me once in a discussion, and I imagine you say this to other people, so I don't think it's a private piece of information. But you said, I find that it takes most people 3 years to get really good at UX research. And that reminds me of how so many companies think, hey, just throw a product manager at some research. Hey, just throw an engineer at some research. And I'm thinking, hey, the spirit of Michele Ronsen is flying over my head right now. And she says, hey, it really takes 3 years. That's almost 5,000 hours of full-time work to get good at something. And so I'm always so nervous when someone misunderstands or minimizes research and acts like just get a business analyst to interview our customers.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of things that we can do to enable them to ask better questions, but there's a very big difference between conducting research and asking questions. And there are, many shades of gray and a lot of things that we can do, a lot of tools that I've built, a lot of kind of baby steps. This is a lot of what I do in my corporate training is I work with corporations to help them upskill their non-researchers. So I work with design teams, I work with product managers, I work with developers. and educate them on the fundamentals of what research is and isn't. When do we do generative research and why is it important? When do we do evaluative research and why is it important? When are we done? The answer is never, right? Research should be like breathing, right? When we know what happens when we stop breathing, right? It's like marketing, it's like sales. You're never done. It's a constant effort because our environment's static, our competition isn't static. Look at the changes with COVID, look at the changes with the environment, look at the changes with our supply chain. Nothing is, and the behaviors and the attitudes of the people we're designing for are continuing to change. So teaching people
Totally
how to
agree.
ask better questions is not only something that will help them design better products and services, it's something that will help them work better as a team, and it's something that will help them in all aspects of their life outside of their professional business. It'll help you, on your next date. It'll help you talk to, the customer service agent that's giving you trouble because you can't exchange your airfare ticket. It's just, I think it should be taught in schools. It should be taught in elementary school.
There you go. Before we've got a question in LinkedIn that I want to get to, but first, I think Aitan is really in mind reading mode today because she says, can we also at some point talk about storytelling skills, techniques, and resources when presenting UX research, please, please? She doesn't know that you and I already scheduled that show for September 9. So, Aitan
Great.
and other Michele fans and research fans, please mark your calendars for September 9. Our show is going to be special guest Michele Ronsen talking about storytelling in UX research. Aitan, you're on a roll. Now, our question from LinkedIn sounds like this. How do we get buy-in for user research in a large organization with low UX maturity, which has a lot of bureaucracy, preventing direct access to end users, especially in a B2B context? Got any advice for the you can't talk to users? Ooh, I'm echoing.
I do. My first question, I hate to answer a series of questions, but my approach would be to diagnose the situation. My approach would be to put on your research hat first and understand what the history of research is within the organization. What sorts of primary research have been conducted, what sorts of secondary research have been conducted, what sorts of evaluative, what sorts of generative. I would want to understand the environment and who did that research, who conducted it, who led it, who took part in it, what the outcome of that research was it a positive experience, was it negative, what were the learnings acted upon, what worked well, what didn't, and why. And then I would use that information to determine whether or not I'm going to make this fight, because sometimes it's not worth it. Sometimes it's like pushing water uphill and you're going to keep banging your head against the wall,
water.
and that's not fun.
Yeah, and I want to add for the person who asked the question, my theme for 2021 is to use the terms business intelligence and risk mitigation around CX and UX work as much as possible. You might think, I don't want that person to talk to users, I don't want to bug my users or whatever it is. That is business intelligence that your company is missing out on. And there's a good chance that your competitors are getting that business intelligence for themselves. So you are creating risk by not really understanding your customers, their tasks, their needs, their pain points. I find that the more we speak the business's language around this, the more I hope someone will take us seriously. Michele, something to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, once we, in diagnosing sort of the current state, I would understand where is the pushback, right? Like, do your own research, find out what the attitudes and the behaviors are around this to help support your argument if you choose to make it. I think my earlier point, I didn't, put an exclamation on it or tie it up nicely. There's nothing wrong with breaking up with a company that doesn't match your goals or isn't a good culture fit for you.
Sure.
The sooner you know this, the better. My suggestion is to try to figure this out in the interview process. But if you're already at the organization, you're already building in, you're already locked in there, I'd look to understand what the barriers are. Is it no time? Is it no money? Is it because research has never been done, so it's unfamiliar, it's mysterious, it's scary? Is it because there's no formal expertise? Is it because it's just a different mindset? Is it a really waterfall, kind of antiquated mindset to product development? And once you're able to kind of isolate where the primary barriers are, the number of different, kind of rationalizations and approaches that you can take to, kind of move through. But working towards finding a team that fits your UX maturity and fits your goals is really, really important. Now, how are you going to ascertain what some of those challenges are or some of those barriers are? Again, I'd put on your own research hat and try to understand the situation, understand the behaviors and the attitudes of the current state. And then when you're meeting with these people, these key stakeholders, the stakeholder kickoff questions tool that I have on curiositytank.com is a great way to begin these conversations and establish some credibility for yourself. So you might even just start off asking questions that are not research related. So for example, how did this project materialize? Like, what was the motive, right? How does this tie into the organization's broader goals? How important is this project, right? And I would kind of frame these questions to serve up to, the point that you want to get to, which is your goal. Other questions like, what do we already know, or what do we already assume about this topic or the target? How do we know this? And then maybe questions around confidence, right? Like, how confident are you or are we? And the killer one that I have used a lot is with both clients and in my own business. And I know, like, I'm serious as a heart attack when I get to this point, when I say to a client or someone in my own business, I'm not confident in that decision, and I am saying this as a researcher. So I would not recommend going forward until we have some more information on this topic. At this point, I am not confident. I cannot make that recommendation. I have not heard X, Y, or Z, and we need more information. You're welcome to move forward as you please, but if
At your own risk.
At your own, exactly.
Yeah. Here's what we did. That's a great thing about that, is you can say, here's what we know, here's what we don't know. And if we move forward without that knowledge, here's the risk it creates. We've got questions in the chat room. We've got Kayleen, Ray, and Ekta. So let's get these up one at a time. I apologize for some of the feedback on my voice. I think I'm coming out of Michelle's computer speakers or something. So Kayleen asks, let me roll back to it so I can find it. How do you know it takes 3 years to get good at UX research? Does this info come from your experience of mentoring and teaching UX research to students?
It comes from my own practice. It comes from teaching and mentoring. It comes from working inside organizations and leading corporate workshops. But also because first of all, in 3 years, I mean, the maximum amount of studies you will conduct, I mean, the amount of studies you'll conduct per year is limited, right? If we're talking about a really broad skill set in terms of evaluative research and generative research, it takes repetition and it takes familiarity and it takes a lot of different situations to become proficient. It takes a lot of different recruiting situations. It takes a lot of different question sets. It takes a lot of different stakeholder situations. It takes a lot of different opportunities to present research in different ways. So I'd say 3 years, and you probably have some solid experience under your belt. Before that, there probably hasn't been enough time or opportunity to become proficient in more than one either stage of the process or type of research.
Great, thank you. And thanks to Saeem hope you enjoyed the emoji explosion. Okay, here's a question from Ray along the same lines. I hope everybody can hear my voice okay. Ray says, How do we get our 3 years in? What resources to use to make sure we're starting from the right place, doing the right things to get towards those 3 quality years?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm working hard to fill that gap with the Ask Like a Pro series to provide hands on learning opportunities. Um, the, some people suggest that you go out and freelance on your own. This is not something that I would suggest. I really feel like you'll develop some bad habits unknowingly, and then you'll come to someone like myself later on to fix those. Wherever possible, I suggest finding some sort of mentor to help guide you along the way, and or get into some sort of mentorship program where you will have feedback and guidance. Now, very, very important. I see people comment, that I have this great mentor and I found this great mentor here or there on ADP list or whatever, coffee house, what this or that. And I am positive there are outstanding people on those platforms. But the reality is that those people are not screened necessarily. And many times you may be getting advice from someone who has only been working in the field for 1 or 2 years, and they're not researchers. So when you're looking for a mentor, make sure this is someone who has focused on research exclusively for at least 7 years. At least they're going to have that depth and breadth of experience, and they're going to be able to.
Yes, please look these people up on LinkedIn if they are visual designers. Sorry.
Do your research. Do your research. Think like a researcher in every single thing that you do. Being a researcher is a mindset, right? Being a researcher is a mindset. It's not a job.
It's a way of life.
It's a mindset. It's a way of life.
All
Ask
right.
my poor tortured behind me.
No, we're going to leave her out of it today. Kayleen says, I am taking notes like crazy. Great. Let's put up Ekta's question. Besides affinity mapping, hold on, let me read it. Besides affinity mapping, what are the other go-to techniques to make sense of a mountain of data from generative research?
Oh gosh. So I teach a whole class on this called Spot Patterns. This is available on curiositytank.com/workshops. You can purchase that on demand. There are a slew of different approaches. In order to provide a more informed response, I need to know what kind of data is included. Are we talking about video data? Are we talking about artifacts? Are we talking about open responses in a survey? There's a lot of different approaches. It would be helpful to know what kind of data and what the goals are of research. But there's many different approaches to doing this. And we cover those in the Spot Patterns workshop.
Yeah, sorry, it's a hard question to answer without knowing more. Here is a question from Aitan, and she says, I know it's a cliche question, but it's also the one I'm struggling to answer. How do you deal professionally with stakeholders that question your methods or results during or after your presentation?
Okay, so first of all, your stakeholders, your primary stakeholders should have been included in the planning process, right? So they should have been included when you were forming the question sets, when you were identifying the primary recruiting criteria and the attitudes and the behaviors of the people best suited to provide you with feedback. They should have been included in the process of at least review the discussion guide. The more buy-in, the buy-in from your stakeholder, that period starts in the planning process. And I actually teach a whole class on this too, a whole workshop called Plan, which is all about developing a research plan with stakeholder buy-in. So this is very much a collaboration, and it starts way before you present research learnings. The bottom line is, if they're included in the process, if they feel heard, and these sample stakeholder kickoff questions will ensure that they are heard, then they will, your credibility will increase. The credibility for the research will increase. And by the time you get to sharing the learnings, first of all, they should have already have a good sense of what the top line is by that point. No surprises. Zero surprises with our stakeholders is our goal. But to answer your question, it should have started in the planning process. Check out the workshop called Plan.
Cool, thank you. We've also got Glenn here, and it says, "Hi, Debbie and Delta CX friends. Michele, do you have any statistics on project success or failure if you have zero UX research at any stage during the project lifecycle?"
Do I have any statistics about product success or failure if there's no research? I do not.
Project success or failure, yeah.
I don't tend to run in those circles. I don't. I tend to surround myself with people who are UX mature organizations, more human-centered, customer-centered, customer-centric organizations. I think that would be a very hard statistic to, first of all, like it's sort of an interesting conundrum, because you'd have to do research to even get that statistic. And if these are not research or data-driven organizations, they're probably not tracking it in that way. But that's a really interesting question.
Yeah, and I'd like to add, hold on, I'm going to try muting Michele's audio when I speak. So I wanted to add that another thing that you might look for there to answer that question is someone at your company knows that. It could be project managers. Project managers might have some sort of way of looking and seeing which projects had success or failure, and then can we try to coordinate that with which projects had research or didn't have research. We don't know if it's correlation or causation, but I wonder if we can trace any of that back.
I think that's an interesting approach. There's an assumption there that the company is tracking success or failure in a consistent way. And I'm not sure they are.
Right.
A different approach might be to look at the rework, or look at the backlog of issues and tally up the tickets or the support issues or the rework that needs to take place, and then see if there is an association between the amount of rework on a product or a feature or whatever that it is, with whether or not there was research done on that particular topic. But you might have research about how to create like the best widget from a content standpoint and what's included, but it may not have included research on who the target is. So I think that would be difficult.
Okay, thanks. We've got a question, and then someone asked a close follow-up question, so I'm going to throw these at you quickly. So Saeem wants to know, what is a rule of thumb for the user sample size for conducting qualitative research, and what's the logic behind it? But then we had a quick follow-up from Aitan, who said there's a bunch of different resources recommending different numbers when it comes to usability or interviewing. How do we figure out which is better? So I think they're kind of both asking the same question. Michele.
Okay, so let's take this in two parts. So usability research may include both qualitative and quantitative approaches. Usability research, we typically isolate our numbers according to the target audiences. So we'll take maybe 5 people that represent a specific segment and perform some usability tests. So with 5 people or so, we should be seeing some clear patterns, assuming these 5 people are from the same segment. So what do I mean by segment? I mean beginning users or expert users or people who are new to our product, new being 30 days or less, right? So we want to define our segmentation very clearly. And with usability, we should be able to see some very clear patterns by speaking with 5 people within that same segment. In terms of generative research and evaluative research, we see some differences there. But the sample size is going to relate more towards the question set than it will about what could you repeat the qualitative sample size question again, Debbie? I'm seeing
Sorry, I was muted because
Debbie.
I'm echoing out your computer. Hold on. I'm going to mute you, Michelle, and I'll read it again. Thanks, everybody. I was muting because of some of the echo we're getting. So the question was, what's the rule of thumb for user sample size for conducting qualitative research, and what's the logic behind it? You just talked about usability testing, but I would think the question has to do with the generative side, the observational research, the interview research. I tend to suggest 8 or more people per segment or persona or customer type. But that's me. What do you recommend? And the question is basically asking, and why?
So I agree with you, Debbie, for generative research, um, uh, in I would say at least 8 people. I would schedule between 8 and 12, depending upon how broad the question is and how broad or how many variables we have in that segmentation. So something like that, like what should we build, right? That is a question that occurs in the very early stage product development. We might want to talk to different segments of people that have this problem, people that have solved this problem, or people that think positively about this problem, or people that think negatively about this problem. But I would agree with you. I would say 8 to 12 people per segment for generative is a great place to start. You may find within that one initial segment or 2 initial segments that there's actually some sub segments in there, and you might choose to go deeper. But sort of a place to start, I would say double what we normally do for usability, which is 4 to 5 per segment.
Yeah, thanks for that. And that's why people who've watched the show know that when I talk about some of the research work I've recently done, we did one where we had 4 groups and we met 27 people. And we had one where we had 6 groups and we met 71 people. So I always shoot for that 8 to 12 where I can, and I recommend it for others as well. We were shooting for 8 to 12 with the 27. We invited 38 people and 27 showed up. So we ended up a little short, but we were close. Let me mute you again because of the echo. So I do want to ask a little bit more about some of that stakeholder stuff that you were talking about. How can we set ourselves up for success with a better kickoff meeting with our stakeholders?
So I think you'll find the questions in the stakeholder tool really helpful. One of the best areas to focus on in terms of setting you up for success is having a conversation with your stakeholders about what success looks like to them. So people that go through my courses or even listen to Debbie's show with me on it or my events, I have feel very, very strongly that everybody has a beautiful mind, right? Your product manager thinks very differently from your designer, who thinks very differently from your writer, who thinks very differently from the CEO. And what I want to do and what has worked best for me is to really harness and get my hands around these people. I want to harness their beautiful minds and their beautiful brains. And I want to not only mine like how they think about this problem or this research question or whatever we're exploring, because they each are coming at it from different their different experience sets, right? But I also want to understand what success looks like to each of them, because what success looks like to the product manager is likely very different than what it looks like to the developer, is likely different than what it looks like, right, or to the researcher, right? So part of those kickoff questions include, what does success look like? Right? What does success to you as an individual in your role? What does success look like to the business? What are we looking for short term? What are we looking for long term? What are we looking for internally or externally? You know, what is the what are the results of this study need to include or provide information on, and to what degree, right? What level of confidence is desired is also really helpful. And that ties really to the earlier question about what happens when stakeholders are pushing back in when you're presenting the learnings, right? So, and I said, whoa, wait a minute. That buy-in and that collaboration should have started in the planning process, right? Because I'm planning at the onset because I've already understood and gone out of my way to find out what success looks like to each of these core stakeholders to build a plan to address that, right? Another great question is, why are they interested in exploring this question set? And that also, that motivation might really differ as well. And that's really great information to have.
Great. And for people who don't see the screen, since we know we have some listeners who listen without looking at the screen, we've got a URL up on the screen that I'm going to read out to you slowly. It's curiositytank.com/ and then this is all lowercase, sample dash stakeholder dash kickoff as one word dash questions. And you can check that out and give it a look. And quick follow-up question from Ekta: what are the common ways to segment people in generative research? This is a follow-up to the 8 to 12 participants per segment question.
So, Ekta, that's a great question, and it's totally dependent upon what you're looking to learn, right? So we might want to it should completely relate to your research questions. Are we looking to learn about how two different segments compare or contrast? Are we looking to learn about how deep a problem is and whether we should invest time into it? Are we looking to learn about how well something or how we can improve something that our competitor has? Are we looking? The sky's the limit. That should be determined by your research question.
Great. And she says, I thought you might say that. So just a quick reminder to everybody, we've got about 10 more minutes left with Michele. If you have a question, please get it in now because we're going to have to say goodbye to her soon. Please remember that you can subscribe here on the Delta CX YouTube channel. Won't you usability test our subscribe button and ring that bell? And please have empathy for the like button. And after the stream, come on back and leave some comments. That helps us with the algorithm. You can also join our Slack workspace, which is completely free, deltacx.link/join Slack. And of course, there is always the tip jar, which is optional but greatly appreciated and currently funds me buying lots of cans of chickpeas. Let's see what else. Aitan says, I have a question. Okay, don't forget to type it. You don't have to type I have a question. Just put up your question. So question is coming from Aitan. We will someday know what it is. But while that's happening, let me remind everybody while I've got Michele muted. Sorry, Michele, we have some feedback today. Michele is scheduled for 2 more shows with us, and I'm trying to find them quickly in my calendar. Yes, Monday, August 23rd. Michele will be talking about moderated or unmoderated research pros and cons of both, when you might want to pick them. So we're going to have a whole show just on that. And then, as we said earlier, September 9th, storytelling in UX research. So make sure you're marking your calendars for that. Don't forget to check out her stuff on curiositytank.com. Let's see. Aitan says, so when you can't reach real end users, because I guess because of GDPR and stuff, how do you recruit interviewees? So, I guess where there are privacy laws and the like, how do you recruit people in the face of privacy laws?
So I'm going to make the assumption that you either work in some sort of finance related group or healthcare,
She's
or
actually
some
looking
sort of
for her first job.
Okay. Then what I would do is create a lookalike audience. And I would identify the behaviors and the characteristics of the people who represent the end user that we're designing for, and then recruit a lookalike audience.
Can you explain
Ideally,
a lookalike
if
audience?
Sure. So let's just say that we're developing a new investment portfolio and we're looking for people who have investable assets of, this is a conversation I had last week with someone, of $250,000, and they want to invest the money on their own. They are looking for funds that are environmentally friendly and global, and with investment managers that have a track record in XYZ. This is a very specific use case. So what we could do there is create a lookalike audience. Now imagine the question is, we want to know how likely these people are to in the organization to also invest in this fund or buy this product. Let's make it simple. What we would do is identify the behaviors and the characteristics and the attitudes of those people, and then recruit lookalikes. So we could go to places where they hang out.
Aitan was saying the question that I asked you was a question she was asked in a recent job interview. How would she recruit in the face of GDPR and privacy?
Yeah. So again, I would want to know what the sector is and what is the research question. And then if I really truly didn't have access to these people, but I can't understand why I wouldn't, or couldn't figure it out, I would create a lookalike audience. And if this is an ongoing problem, I would also create a participant pool with a lookalike audience. So I wouldn't have to deal with this every time I ran a research study. I would have constant warm bodies there, and I would be nurturing those people in the participant pool to gather smoke signals over time.
Yeah.
Far more efficient and effective approach.
Yeah, and we actually did a show. I don't remember what episode it was. I think early 100s number. And we had Sotiris talking about how to create your own participant pool. So that will tie in there. We've got a couple of comments in the chat room. Kayleen says, from the perspective of a noob, I was frustrated and didn't understand why UXers kept saying, it depends, until I did a project myself. If possible, providing 2 examples of cases with numbers, even if they're not representative of the whole landscape, might help non-UXers understand better why expertise is necessary to conduct research and that there is no template. Knowing that we've got a few minutes left, I'm going to say we have time for one more question, so I'm going to put Madalena's question up and read it out loud. Oh, sorry, Michelle wants to add something to that. I'll turn you back on.
So that is also like totally underscores what we were talking about earlier about 3 years, right? There are so many it depends situations. You need time to go through these it depends situations to learn what worked well and what didn't in order to become proficient, in my opinion.
Yeah, super. Thanks. So our last question for today before we go into parting words from Madalena is, where did I lost it? Here it is. What was the most frustrating experience, I don't know if you can talk about it, you've ever had with stakeholders doubting qualitative research?
Oh, this is very, very clear. I was brought in by the CFO of a company to help them understand who was actually using their product. So basically, to develop a series of personas for them, so that they had a better idea of how to message, how to market, and to inform the roadmap. And the CEO, the founder of the company, absolutely did not believe in research. He had the attitude he knows everything he needs to know, and he had this huge ego. Earlier I mentioned identifying the barriers in research, and the mindset is one of them, right? This is absolutely someone who did not believe in research and felt like this was everything. So my frustrating experience was when I presented a bunch of research to him, he slammed me down, and consistently, this isn't accurate, this isn't credible, this isn't this isn't that. And I started to argue or reason with him and the other partner is backing me up 100%. And I wound up walking out of the meeting and ending the contract. This was not something that I wanted to do. It was not how I wanted to spend my time. Let's just say nicely. Well, that was about 3 years ago. And every single recommendation that I produced has now been implemented. So that is very frustrating.
Someone's put up the Don Norman emoji. So true. We've got time for one question. I'm going to sneak in Terry's question, and then we're going to have to sign off. So thanks for staying maybe a minute late. Terry says, as an aspect of buy-in, can you talk about scope and timing of research projects? Maybe generally.
Yes. So scope and timing is likely tied or should be tied to the level of confidence that you need and when you need to make that informed decision. So I have this iron triangle, right? And it there's 3 points on the triangle. One is stakeholder buy-in, one are time and money, and the other is skills and resources. So when I'm scoping a project, some of the initial questions, which are on those stakeholder kickoff questions documents, are when do we need to know the answers, to this question? What level of confidence do we need? And that will inform the scope, or should inform the scope.
Right, because it might also affect how many people you choose to include in the study as participants and methodologies. And don't forget to scope time for coding, analysis, synthesis, diagramming.
And the level of deliverables and the number of segments and the whether you do 1 round or 5 rounds or things like that. So what are we looking to learn? When do we need to learn this by, and how confident do we want to be? Are we looking for just a smoke signal, or are we looking for something far more robust?
Great, great. So we're just about out of time. Thanks to everybody who joined live today, of all the great questions that came in. And thanks as always to Michele for all of her wisdom and answers and ideas. Michele, tell everybody where they can find you, follow you, stalk you, hire you. Where do we find you?
Thank you so much. I'm super active on LinkedIn. That's how Debbie and I actually met. So please connect with me on LinkedIn. I post quite frequently about conversations from the classroom, and these are questions from clients. They're questions from my students. That's a great way to build up your research knowledge and acumen. I also have a newsletter called Fuel Your Curiosity. And you can subscribe to that on curiositytank.com. And there are a number of free resources on my website as well. And you can find those at curiositytank.com/resources. I'd love to hear from you. Shoot me a note on LinkedIn, shoot me an email. If there's other topics you guys would like to discuss, Debbie and I are usually game for that. And this topic and the 2 future topics that we have scheduled were all requested. So we're listening. We're doing our own research to improve your experience as well.
Right. We care about the customer experience. Michelle is sometimes in our Slack universe, but don't bug her too much. But she is sometimes there. So
Thank you again for having me. It's always a pleasure, Debbie.
thank you. And thanks to Kayleen for putting up lots of relevant emoji today. We're about to get a detective emoji floating by our faces whenever my system decides to put that up. I don't know. Sorry, Kayleen, but thanks for the detective. I'm going to say goodbye to everybody, play us out of here. Tomorrow is reaction stream. It's going to be extra long because you all have been sending me wild stuff for the last week or two. It is not going to be a short stream, probably a full hour of reacting to crazy crap. So I will see people tomorrow. If not, have a great weekend. Stay safe. Wear 17 masks. Please be careful. Thanks again to Michelle, and see everybody soon. Bye. Customer centricity as business intelligence. Visit deltacx.com to learn why we are